Well, good evening, everyone. Looks like we have about 75 folks joining us already, and it's 8 o'clock on the dot, so punctual crowd. We love that. We got Mr. Chadwick on the line. Hearing me just fine, Doug?
Yeah, except this 8 o'clock part. Where are you?
I'm coming to everyone from the New River Valley in Virginia.
Yeah, well, okay.
Stepping briefly away from the Rocky Mountains. So,
All right.
A later evening here, but we're grateful to everyone for joining us from wherever you are. We'll get going and turn it over to Doug shortly. But on behalf of everyone from the Vital Ground Foundation, I want to welcome you to our 4/5 Grizzly book chat with the one and only Doug Chadwick. My name is Matt Hart. I work on the communications staff for Vital Ground, and I'm our resident English major. So when an evening like this rolls around, it's my honor and pleasure to host the thing. And it's a special treat to host Doug as a great writer and a great friend and longtime anchor of Vital Ground in our conservation work. So we are really grateful to have you all with us. And for those unfamiliar with Vital Ground who are just here because of Mr. Chadwick, the brief introduction to our organization is that we're a land trust that conserves and connects habitat for grizzly bears and other wildlife. We're based in Missoula, Montana, and have been working in the Northern Rockies for just over 30 years. We got started when a few guys named Doug, including Mr. Chadwick, Doug Seuss and Lynn Seuss, and a very large grizzly bear named Bart, began raising money to support grizzly conservation in the Northern Rockies. And we've come a long way and protected and enhanced over 620,000 acres since those early days in the early 90s. And we do want to just acknowledge all of the Bart the Bear fans joining us tonight, that it's our first event with the public audience since the passing of Bart the Bear 2, one of our beloved animal ambassadors. And we are very appreciative at Vital Ground of all the notes of support that have come in since we lost Bart last month. And Doug and Lynn, we are certainly thinking of you, especially. So that's Vital Ground. And now on to the main event. We are really happy to welcome Doug Chadwick as our guest speaker tonight. Doug's history is a dual one as a scientist and as a writer. He has a bachelor's degree in zoology from the University of Washington, a master's in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. And as a biologist, he studied mountain goats, harlequin ducks, grizzly bears, wolverines, to name a few. And as a writer, he's reported on wildlife from around the world, from right whales in subantarctic to snow leopards in the Himalaya. He's written close to 50 articles for National Geographic magazine, and he's written 13 books about wildlife and conservation, including several focused right in our area of the Northern Rockies. Most recently, Doug's the author of 4/5 Grizzly, which is what brings us together tonight. It's a wonderful book, as the subtitle says, providing a new perspective on nature that, who knows, just might save us all. We're delighted to have Doug give a presentation about the book. There will be time for some Q&A afterward. So use the Q&A function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen to send in those questions. Kevin Rhodes from our communication staff will be sorting through them behind the scenes. And once Doug has given us a presentation, we'll have a little bit of a chance for a few questions and answers and try to keep things at roughly an hour. If you like the book and haven't picked up a copy yet, I would certainly encourage you to do so. You can find it at your local bookstore or head over to the Vital Ground website and click on shop, and we have copies available for you to order through our website and support conservation in the process. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Doug and turn my screen off and listen attentively along with the rest of you. Thanks, Doug. It's all you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay before you sign off? Okay. So it's just going to be me in the corner and a bunch of pixels. You mentioned Doug Seuss, and I known both Bart the Bears well over the last 30 years. And I got to tell you, Doug Seuss made sure to call me right before this to say those encouraging words like, buddy, do not screw this up. No pressure, but anyway, typical. That's how he deals with bears. And I'm going to be talking about the book, which is not 4/5 about grizzly bears. It's about the conservation of nature. And perhaps more to the point, it's about what nature is. If we're going to try to save it, we need to know, we need some new ideas based on recent decades of research about what nature actually is and how it actually works. And that's a bit hard to explain in an introduction. So just let me jump in, because what I really want to do is start off by showing you my baby picture. Everybody says it's adorable, so here we go. Let's see if I can get it. And of course, it's not showing up. So hold on. This is a new one for me. There we go. That's my baby picture. That is how I started off in life, as a egg in the process of being fertilized. I was about 4 1/1000ths of an inch in size. There were bacteria and amoeba bigger than I was. So 2 things to start with. 99.9% of the life on this planet is invisible to us, of the creatures on this planet. They're microbes. And secondly, I started off as one. But I had plans, because in that fertilized egg were 23,000 genes. And I went on to become that guy in the corner of the screen with about 30 trillion human cells. So I done good. Now, I want to tell you about my other 30 trillion plus cells that I host. They're not human cells, they're microbes. And they come in the form of fungi, bacteria, archaea, protozoans, and they're digesting my food for me. They're producing vitamins I can't produce by myself. They're defending me against certain diseases. They're also producing hormones and other chemicals. And some of those hormones are like the psychoactive ones we produce ourselves that determine moods and our thoughts, and in some ways our actions. So there's a bit more to me that way, and to you. And inside each of those 30 trillion human cells that I carry are the organelles called mitochondria. And I'm sorry if this is starting off like a biology class, but we need to know this, that those organelles, as they're called, the mitochondria, are fuel cells. They power our metabolism. They give us our energy. They allow us to move. All motion and thoughts and feelings, everything I have is powered by mitochondria, which have their own DNA, different from ours, and reproduce independently. which is your clue that they are actually another organism. They're modified ancient bacteria. And they are doing the same for every creature, every plant, and every animal on the planet. So speaking of the planet, I was up, I don't know, 9,000 or 10,000 feet up in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming at one point, and I'm caving, limestone caves, and I'm crawling through a narrow passage on my back, and my headlights starting to sparkle on stuff on the ceiling, and I look up and I'm seeing coral, ancient coral. They were probably 300 million to 500 million years old. So just definitely a insight into the fact that corals built much of the world. They've been around a very long time. They are still among the richest parts of the ocean. They're where a tremendous amount of biodiversity is. And like me, like you, they are a combination critter, a combo critter. They are a polyp, somewhat like a small anemone, combined with algae, which photosynthesize and provide food, extra food. And I think more people are, this is called a symbiosis, right? To a mutually beneficial association between a couple of critters. But most of us know lichens. They cover about 6% of the land surface on the planet. And most people know they're actually a combination of a fungus and algae. And what most people don't know is that it was recently found that it's almost always two kinds of fungi from different families, and not only algae, but cyanobacteria, which are capable of photosynthesis. In fact, they probably invented it 2.2 billion years back. And they've been filling the sky with oxygen ever since, and went on to give rise to all the green plants. So you might pause just for a minute to give some invisible bacteria, cyanobacteria, thanks for taking your next deep breath and providing the energy that has us walking across the planet. But now when I look at a tree, any tree or any plant, almost any plant, I see something resembling a lichen, because attached to the roots of more than 90% of all the plants looked at in detail so far are invisible threads of fungi. So it's resembling a lichen, but the fungal part is underground and we see the green part above. But that underground part extends the root system through these invisible threads by an order of 10, an order of magnitude. In other words, if you were to go out and grab a handful of soil in your yard, it would contain anywhere from 80 to, I don't know, several hundred miles of mycorrhizal fungi. Then they form this vast subterranean network, bringing water and minerals and other nutrients, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, to the plants in return for a little sip of sugar, which the green plants produce. And it's a mutually beneficial symbiosis. It's everywhere. It forms an underground internet or freeway system, or, for the exchange of nutrients and information through chemicals. It goes from mother trees to their offspring. It goes between plants of the same species, and it goes between plants of different species. So there's a forest, and the trees in that forest are connected at a level most people have it's impossible for us to really envision, because again, it's not visible to the naked eye. And when you look at the green part of the plants, back to the cell again, The green part comes from chloroplasts, which do the work of transforming or using solar energy to make food, the basis of food chains around the world. And sure enough, the chloroplasts are modified cyanobacteria. And then, of course, they're being energized by the mitochondria in these cells. So the question is, what is a tree and what's a wildflower? And like us, it's a compound creature. It's a joint venture between species. It's an ecosystem within the ecosystem. It's not the way we think of nature, which is as kind of a list of separate species and some relationships between them, but those species, there's no such thing as an individual organism larger than bacteria and archaea. Now, one more example. If you were in East Africa looking at the acacia trees, you'd have to add 2 more members of that community in what we see as one tree. That would include, well, more than 2. Let's start with the nodules in the roots that host nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Nitrogen is the key to growth and structure of proteins. The acacia makes thorns to protect itself from big grazers, but it also makes these inflated thorns that serve as nests for the ants, I hope you can see in this picture. So it's a little fuzzy, but they're the black dots. And the acacia produces sweet, sugary nectaries, as they're called. There's just little tips of their leaves to feed the ants. So they get food and lodging. And in return, these are really aggressive ants, and they defend the tree against the smaller grazers, which would be a whole host of other leaf-eating insects. And finally, add the symbiotic bacteria that live in grooves on the soles of the feet of those ants. They produce chemicals that are toxic to molds and to harmful bacteria that could affect the leaves. And as the ants roam the acacia defending their territory, they're tracking these compounds over all the surfaces of the leaves. Now, before you get completely geeked out, let's go to what you and also I would be really looking for when we think of nature in East Africa. And I've spent a lot of time there, and I never ever get tired of seeing the world as though we were still in the age of great mammals. And this is a rainy season picture. You can see distant rainfall. Everything's pretty lush. But East Africa is basically a semi-arid grassland subject to long, long dry spells in between the rainy seasons and often subject to years-long droughts. So after I get over the elephants and giraffes and the parade of colors and shapes and sizes of the mammals, I do ask myself how this land stays so productive over time. And the answer has a great deal to do with the animals that outweigh all those big mammals in East Africa, and that would be termites, because they're recycling the animals' dung, the dried grasses, the twigs, the sticks, and even larger wood. And I think a lot of people have heard that termites, I borrowed this from a pest control site. I stole this photo, and it says, unfortunately, termites will eat your house or something like that. But they don't do it. The people know that these protozoans in the termites' guts that actually can digest wood, except it was recently found that it's actually bacteria in the cell walls of the protozoans that produce the digestive enzymes that allows termites to do what they do. So you've got symbionts within symbionts. And again, when you have a community of symbionts, what you really have is what is called a holobiont. I like that name. this holistic name. And so the question is, where is the individual? What is an animal? How does it work? And the reason I'm going into all that biology is because of how we think about nature determines how much of nature is going to make it into the next century and beyond. So here's a chart of our population growth, which is a story all in itself. Our kind arose 350,000 years ago. And it wasn't until just 12,000 years ago that we reached our first million in population. And it wasn't until the 1800s that we finally hit the first billion. We're now at 8 billion. And we're transforming the skies, the makeup of the seas, and the shape of the land and its habitats. And the extinction rate for species on planet Earth looks almost exactly like this chart of human population growth, parallels it. They think the rate of extinction is between hundreds and 1,000 times higher than it's been on average through the history of life. If you look at the two pie charts, they tell another story the same story actually in a different way. So the pie charts are the living weight of land-dwelling mammals on the planet. The blue is us, humankind. The gray is our livestock. And that little wedge of green is all the wild mammals that still exist on Earth. And this is from 2000. It's a smaller, narrower wedge now. In just the last 50 years, if you look over on the left, the total numbers of all the animals with backbones, so we're talking fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, have decreased 70%. So everywhere there were 10, there are now 3, and that's just in a half century. So this is pretty serious stuff. And again, how we think about nature is, there's been a ton of technology and molecular biology and scientific advances in the last few decades that revise our view of how living systems work and how organisms operate, but it hasn't made it very far out into the public. But in the meantime, in 1 century, we took 2 million of the greatest creatures ever to be on the planet, the great whales, the great baleen whales, 2 million of them, and reduced them to a few hundred. And that was equal to 2 times the living weight of all the mammals on the planet. And in 2 centuries before now, we've reduced 25 to 50 million elephants to a few 100,000. So, it's hard to just give a talk and describe what's going on in nature without sounding like, classic doom and gloom enviro. And yet, these are simply facts, and this is what's going on. But what we should question is, what are we losing? Every animal that still exists is a right answer to the question of how best to live in some way, in some part of the Earth. And we can now tap into that knowledge through molecular biology and begin to understand it and see how it might apply to us. And this is beyond the value of every creature just for its own sake. But if we're only interested in ourselves, we're throwing away libraries or huge, the data stocks of the world in how to make chemicals, how to detoxify compounds, how to make an eye, how to make a structure that is stronger than anything we can now build. That's what's being lost when you think of the extinction rate, where the predictions are we will lose 1/4 to 1/2 of all the remaining species before the end of this century. But take another look at the elephant and the whale and think, what else is being lost? What do these animals know? How does their brain work? That's a sperm whale brain on the right. And we, who pride ourselves on our big brains, that's us on the left, the little one. And there's an elephant brain compared to a human in the upper left, the elephant brain on the bottom. And you might also want to know that elephants, despite having many, many hundred times more cells than we do and living as long as we do, having advanced and very altruistic social systems, wonderful care of the young, communication skills, all that. Not so surprisingly, their brain is about 3 times the size of ours. But with all those cells, elephants very, very rarely get cancer. And what can we learn from them in that respect? So the list of reasons to, question, not just question, but try very hard to reverse the loss of information in the form of species out there, not to mention great company and inspiration and, the vitality of the planet. We're thinking about hard. So enough doom and gloom. I want to look at what's going right. And it turns out a lot's going right here where we live in the Rockies in the Continental Divide area. So if you look on the left, the hotter colors represent a greater number of large mammals, the carnivores and hoofed animals. And okay, that's been reduced since historic times, since colonization by Europeans, but we're still in the hot spot right now. And this is one of the great intact ecosystems with all the species that belong there still there in the world. There's a very small number of those. And the black outline is the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, started in 1993. You see it on the left, and the bright or the green, distinct green, is the parks we know and love, and the wilderness areas, the preserves, Yellowstone down the bottom, up through, this is central Idaho wildlands, Glacier Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, Jasper and Banff up north, etc. Now, what we've been doing is continuing to think of conservation. I say we are society, the majority of people, not necessarily any of you out there. But we've created a series of islands that we want to represent nature, and we feel pretty good about it. Some of these areas, like the Rockies, it's a priceless string of these refuges for wildlife. And the problem over the long run is that we know the greatest rates of extinction by far, the majority of extinctions that have taken place over time, so that we've been able to record them, have been on oceanic islands. Why? Because they're isolated. They're subject to whatever comes their way, from hurricanes to disease to whatever. And the animals on them and the plants are subject to inbreeding. Now, nature over time works through connections. The animals and the plants have to be able to move, exchange genes, repopulate areas that have suffered from the inevitable fires or droughts or floods or insect outbreaks or whatever it is, and also adapt to changing climates, which becomes really important these days. But you can see in 2 decades, those green islands have been connected by more and more types of lands protected in various other categories besides strictly protected preserves. And that includes land trusts like Vital Ground, working on some fairly small areas, but key to connecting some of these big strongholds, remaining strongholds of nature. And yeah, I'm being parochial. I'm looking at the lands we know and love out here in the West, but this could as easily be a map of the reserves set aside in Kenya or Tanzania or Thailand. And we're trying to preserve nature with the old model. And that we can't pat ourselves on the back and say we're done, because what was intact wildlands, or at least lands the animals could still move freely through in recent decades, is rapidly becoming filled with people. And so our existing parks and preserves, our existing strongholds of nature are becoming islands in a sea of human activity and development and transformation of the landscapes. But this is a can-do project. You can see it's working. The connectivity has increased by 20% or more over time. There have been more reserves added, more core areas. This is a can-do deal. And it's being done deal. And if we approach conservation that way, then I think our hopes for the future we're justified in being optimistic, at least in a certain amount of countryside. But the connections have to be big. The likes of grizzly bears and wolves and moose and elk did not arise in little isolated reserves or even medium-sized reserves. They moved in over big sweeps of country, and that's what made the animals we know. Here's one of them. It's a young male bear trying to get across I-90 and failing, I don't know how many times, but bouncing off that highway. Grizzlies do not like to cross highways. Those that do sometimes end up smooshed, but especially females with cubs will not cross these barriers. This one male, a young male dispersing from up north, probably the Glacier Bob Marshall, did make it across finally. And you can see over on the left headed down, and they're pretty sure that same male is the one later seen in the Pintler Mountains, pretty far south. This is the kind of movement that has to happen over the long run for populations to survive and not get separated into islands. And this is a really easy way to do it if we can get the highway department to put that into their budget. The highway crossings, I call it a pedestrian footbridge for four-legged, and it works. This is over the Trans-Canada, which is a real barrier to wildlife movement, and all the different species that live there are now using it, including female bears with young. So the older way we used to think of is, on the left, you see sustainable development in the orange part of it. Well, what we're doing was looking at the economy, the environment, and society's needs as competing interests, and where can we compromise? But if you look over on the right, you see our economy and the health of our society are embedded within the health of the environment and the resources we have managed to conserve. And they're not competing, they are one and the same thing. And I think that's easier to see maybe here than some other areas, because Montana's economy and that of southern British Columbia, Alberta, and parts of Idaho and Wyoming, the economy is being driven by tourism and recreation, along with other uses, but if they are all sustainable, then if you want to improve your economy, you take care of your environment. I have what I call the new golden rule for our times, and that is do unto ecosystems as you would have them do unto you. Nurture, sustain health, allow to flourish. A lot of the large landscape concept of conservation comes from studies of genetics, studies of long-term population dynamics, but a lot of it was driven by how bears move across the country. And I know that bears here in my neighborhood in Whitefish may be here 1 week. They may be over on the Blackfoot Reservation a week later. They may be up in southern Alberta the week after that. They need to move over long distances, and it's clear they're very much like us. This picture says it better than I could by far. But besides being able to stand on 2 legs and being devoted mothers, these are a long-lived critter, up to 35 years or more. And you've seen that I like pictures of brains. This is the bear brain in the lower right, and our vaunted human brain up on the upper left. But look at the chimpanzee in the middle row of the top. Bears got them beat. And of course, you can break down the analysis of brains any way you want, but bears have been seen doing problem solving, even using tools. Now, that's granted, this is a guy I worked with studying killer whales. One day he was going along the coast of Alaska, and he saw a bear carefully picking through barnacle encrusted rocks and examining them and then discarding them, and finally found one that fit its palm just right and used it to scratch its rear end through that heavy fur and got a really good itch taken care of. That still qualifies as tool using, just like an elephant will use a stick to reach hard to get places. But they're very bright and they're learning their whole lifetime. The other thing I love about bears, and grizzlies in particular, is that of all the species in our area, they rank out in studies as the one that is the best so-called umbrella species. In other words, where its habitat and range are being taken care of, the most other species native to that area also stand to benefit. And that's because the bear has enormous home ranges of up to several hundred square miles. And it uses all elevations from the valley bottoms to the mountaintops. And so it covers the habitats of all kinds of plants and animals. And this is called a collective journey. Just, this is Brad Rood did this sculpture. And it's down in the National Museum of Wildlife Art on display right now in Jackson Hole. But I just like it because it tells the story in a different way. Oh boy. Now I need to, come on. Matt, can you help me here? Hello, hello.
Hey, Doug, I think maybe your service is blinking out, but we can still see the screen. We can hear you.
Oh, wait, it just moved.
Yeah, we can hear
Doug,
you.
I think you just need to turn your video back on.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how I hit that, but okay. No, it's not advancing. Yeah, boy. Oh, wait, I'm gonna try one more thing. Okay. All right, this was the next slide, I believe. Yes, it was. This is a map from Vital Ground. And the point was just, if we want to keep these areas thriving, these strongholds, Yellowstone, it's park itself is a smaller part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It needs the rest of this. This is the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness areas and other forests that are wildlands. And they have maybe 1 or 2 grizzlies in them now. They used to have a ton. Glacier Park up here, Bob Marshall Wilderness, Cabinet Yaak, Selkirk's, northern Idaho. These are not connected yet. If they're connected, we can then say, yes, we have conserved the grizzly bear. It will go forward, and so will all those other animals that depend on the same habitats. But what you have to do is find the pathways, and there's a lot of radio tracking data, and there's habitat factors, there's topography, there's the degree of human presence and disturbance and so on, but there's still plenty of room there. And some of it is on private land. And what Vital Ground does is work within these like arterial connections here, identify properties that are key to keeping that flow going, and work out a conservation easement with the property owner, which benefits both the owner and benefits wildlife. As long as these areas remain at least permeable to wildlife, we can then count on having the wild communities that we enjoy around for indefinite time. If we don't, it's going to be a nightmare. But we'll leave it at that. But anyway, I love Grizz. They're a totem. They're my umbrella species. They're my assurance of clean air and good water and wild country. And so I had the gall to call this book 4/5 a Grizzly, claiming to be that. Bears are really smart, but I know something they don't, and that's that I really am 4/5 a Grizzly, in the sense that 80% of my genes are identical to theirs, at least 80%. Yeah, the dog in your household, folks, is 85% identical genes to you. So is the wolf out roaming in the backcountry. Cows, 86%. But the point is, I am 4/5 all kinds of bears. And because I'm actually at least 4/5 every mammal on the planet, I didn't call my book 4/5 of duck-billed platypus. I didn't think that was great marketing, but I am 4/5 whatever I want to be in the mammal world, because that's the fact. So I would pick something, like this snow leopard with a coat like, dappled moonlight. But more than 1 out of every 5 species of mammals on the planet is a bat, some type of bat. So I'm 4/5 a lot of critters that people find less than charming, but do a heck of a lot of pollination and seed dispersal. And I'm also, I'm 4/5 a really hopelessly cute red panda. So there. I'm 98 to 99% a chimpanzee in terms of identical genes. I think a lot of people have heard that, are aware of it. They are not, most folks, and again, I'm not speaking so much to this audience, I'm generalizing about the populations of humans everywhere, have little idea that we also share 50 to 60% of our genes with fish, and 30 to 40% with a lot of insects, like these luminous beetles or fireflies. And even dung beetles, but that we're also, if you're a part dung beetle, that's okay, because who else besides termites and ants do you think is doing the major work of fertilizing all those wonderful habitats to support big wildlife around the world? And I threw this in just because I love this picture. These are sea angels. They're actually a type of sea slug. I have no idea really what percentage of genes I share with them. I'd guess it's in the 20 to 30% range, but I know for a fact that I'm 24% a wine grape. Sometimes at certain parties in the evening, maybe a little bit more than that. And I'm 18% a baker's yeast. And I share 7% of my genome with bacteria, which outnumber the stars in the universe. Yeah, I'm bragging. But here's another part of the living world. And this is how we've been looking at viruses for the last couple of years. And I can't blame anybody. In fact, I hesitate to tell anyone that if you stand on a square yard of ground, or if you were floating on a square yard of water, 800 million viruses are going to fall onto that patch of the planet every day. They're ubiquitous, they're in everything, and obviously the majority of them don't affect us at all. But 8% of our genome of human DNA is of viral origin. And some of the segments of DNA have been repurposed. In fact, there's one that is key to forming the placenta in mammals. None of us would have been born without it. There's another viral component that looks as though it got repurposed to form memories in the human brain. So, I don't know. I know I'm a geek. I love these kind of facts, and I don't know what to do with them, and you may not either, but I think they're well worth knowing and pondering. But it certainly keeps coming back to this question of how in the world did we come to think of ourselves as separate from nature and special and different, or liberated from nature, or that conserving nature is kind of an option, something to do if we have enough time and money. But, you know, we can sort of take it or leave it. We're people, we're humans, we're brilliant. It just, you know, I understand why we think that way. It's been very useful. Obviously, there are 8 billion of us today, but the question is it still useful now that there are 8 billion of us today? And I say no, because we look at conserving the living planet as, I don't know, somewhere between a hobby and something pretty far down the list of priorities for societies. The last thing I'll say about our relationship with nature that I hope you'll think about is, this is the automatic part. In Japan, there is a practice called Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. I've been over and done some very disorganized forms of it, but you can take classes in forest bathing in Japan or South Korea, and your health insurer will pay for it. And what it is immersion in nature through all your senses, the smells, the sights, the sounds. And the automatic part is that it doesn't matter whether you think that's woo-woo or whether you even like environmentalists or you think nature is a big pain and we can do without it. When you go out into a natural setting, guided or not guided, let's say you're just sitting on a park bench in a little urban park, your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, your immune system grows stronger and more active, especially the natural killer cells that attack disease. And your thoughts become less intensely focused, and you're more aware in a general way, and your cognitive functions, your thinking functions improve. Now, what more can you ask? Well, you can say this, the other studies show from around the world, in the UK, in other parts of Europe, in the US, and of course in the Orient, that time in nature does all these things beneficial. There are changes in diabetes and heart problems and all kinds of other things. Contact with nature is absolutely one of the best things you can do for your health, and more is better. And people who live with ready access to nature have longer lifespans. That's been shown in huge studies of statistics. And so I don't have time, but I just want to urge you I can't go into it in depth, but I want to urge you to, look into forest bathing and make up your own mind. But the facts are there, the studies are there, and it makes me think in the arguments for saving nature, we have, the save this wildflower because it might hold the cure for cancer. We've got, look at all the technological advances we could make drawing upon insect eyes or the structure of a beetle's wing covers or something like that. We've got the inspiration that offers us. There's you've all got your own reasons, but what we don't do when we go out and argue to preserve more of nature and more of our fellow companions on this planet is just simply say, hey, Mr. Guy on the street, hey, Mrs. City Councilor, hey, Mrs. Senator, would you by any chance be interested in being happier, healthier, and living longer and thinking more clearly? You would. Well, how about making more little parks in urban areas, more green spaces in neighborhoods, planting more trees? How about in the suburbs, keeping more open space, maybe working with land trusts, working with communities? And then as we go farther out, how about saving more of the larger natural areas and connecting them? And that's the best thing you could do for humankind in the long run, as I see it. So I want to read one thing from the book. Before I get completely talked out. An artist commissioned to illustrate the way many folks think about our position in the living world might paint a scene with us as the shining capstone atop a grand pyramid of species. Instead, the growing collection of revelations from recent studies sticks humankind within a tangled skein of other life forms. You, every friend, enemy, lover, dignitary, and desperado, along with every other animal, every plant, and every fungus you'll ever meet, exists as a union. This doesn't refer to being the product of two parents. It means each of us is, by nature, a collaboration or collective, a joint venture of fellow earthlings. Our newly realized position doesn't undermine our prowess and potential, doesn't make us any less amazing. Our spectrum of biological relationships makes us more than human, not less. And being human was already pretty marvelous, for we possess an extraordinary brand of imaginative intelligence, coupled with social mechanisms for sharing and building upon information that appear to be unrivaled. So make of those qualities all you will. But for goodness sake, don't look for insight from anybody not particularly interested in the fate of nature on a living planet, much less willing to do something about it. That holobiont missed the memo to know thyself. I think, again, if we're going to save nature, we need to rethink what it is we're saving. What is nature? What are we? All the big questions. Who are we? What are we made of? Well, it turns out it's not like most people assume. But if we see ourselves in nature and see the nature in us, then I think we can end this business of, decline, a little more loss, a little more loss. You remember those pie charts? And think of those, that little wedge of green with all the wild mammals that still exist. When people start telling you about, well, we need to compromise. Well, the compromise, we're way past it. And we're in this era, we're going to, of continued losses. And if we are going to save nature, I think it's going to have to start with a real revision of how we see ourselves in relation to it. So that's what I've been trying to get at. I don't know how well I communicated it, but I think we have a goal to restore the climate. We have a long-term goal for human health and for the food and nutrition demands, how we're going to meet those. And we need one that stops the net loss of nature and brings us back towards a truly vibrant living planet. So I know you all can read, but I'm going to read this last part to you anyway. Being one with nature sounds like an aspiration. It really isn't, because we already are. So I could have just said that and then we could have just chatted, but there it is. And I'm done. And thank you very much for listening. Is anybody still there?
Hello.
Hi, there's somebody there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm coming back on here, Doug.
It's just been me talking to a bunch of pixels on a screen, so I don't know. Good to see a human face.
So we've got a few questions that have popped in, Doug, and they've some of them are about grizzlies, so we can cycle back to that wonderful animal. There's a question of, what are some of the things you love most about grizzlies that most people don't know, even the big fans who might be on this call tonight?
Okay, that's easy in a way, because grizzlies, I'm really inordinately fond of them, but I don't think I have illusions about them being my big bear buddies. But they wake me all the way up being in their presence, because I am fearful. And I feel like when I'm in grizzly country, I'm as alive as I can be. Those 350,000 years of evolution as humans and the millions of years of hominid evolution before that, all those, what's still there of those senses, of those hormones, of those, the intuition of being aware of your surroundings, that all comes alive in a way I don't feel in, more, more human altered habitats. But it's the presence of those bears. And when you watch them, and I've done this for hundreds and hundreds of hours along salmon streams, where I lose as much fear as I can, because they're not interested in people. They're got full bellies. They're chasing salmon. I've had them come so close to me that they brushed against me when they walked by. And what you can then do is see that each bear is an individual, and the different personalities, different ways of coming at things, different ways of solving problems. And so when we're debating grizzly bears here in the West, it's usually grizzly bears do this, all grizzly bears do that, and everybody's got a position on it. And I say and it's the same with whales, or snow leopards even, although I don't know them as well, but with elephants. In every population, there's Mary Poppins and there's Charlie Manson. And you can tell when Charlie comes into a feeding site on a salmon stream, because all the other bears have wide eyes and their ears are back and there's tension in their muzzle. They don't know what Charlie's going to do next. But to call all bears unpredictable, that's like, no, people are unpredictable. Where the people are predictable and don't bother the bears, they ignore us. But anyway, bears are my entree into how Native Americans saw animal people. They saw bear people, they saw the deer people, they saw the mosquito people. Because bears are curious, they're always manipulating stuff and investigating it, and I can just relate to them more easily. And sometimes when I get a feeling for what they're going to do next, I'm actually right. A lot of times I'm not, but I'm getting there. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the bear's presence just means a lot in a lot of dimensions for me. I don't want to live in a world without them.
Great. Thanks for that great answer and for the question. We have a question about, and you may or may not have read any science about this, of whether the coronavirus has been affecting grizzlies. That might be a quick one to answer. And then also wondering about some of the biggest impacts of climate change on grizzlies.
Well, the first one I don't know anybody else has heard. I haven't heard of it being found in COVID being found in them, but I don't know if anybody's looked. I showed a picture of a snow leopard, and I know that some of the big cats in zoos have COVID. I read about a hippo having it the other day, llamas, a number of animals. So certainly possible. The other question was climate change and grizzlies. And well, having been in like those of you in the audience from Montana, having been in some pretty serious drought conditions since about 2000, I think the bears are probably working a lot harder at finding seasonal foods. And I'm wondering about, the berries come on earlier, but they disappear sooner. And that critical period where a bear through the fall goes into hyperphagia, which means, super eating. And they've got to put on 3 to 5 pounds a day to get enough weight to go into a den and last through 6 months of hibernation. And so if you have dry conditions, drier than usual, then the forage they're eating doesn't have, it dries out and dies sooner, and they don't get the nutrients they need or the energy. And if the berries fall off sooner or are just a poor berry year, their options for putting on the weight they need get diminished. And there's probably a lot of other ways to come at it. The final thing would be, when I'm hiking in the high country anymore, I used to count on when I got up on the ridges and up above 8,000 feet, it was 15 degrees cooler. And boy, there've been a lot of summers when it wasn't. And I wondered if I felt the same question about mountain goats and as grizzlies is, boy, the hours they can feed are reduced and their ability to travel. So I don't know if they're shifting a lot more to nighttime or what, but they've all got to adapt. But again, that's one more reason for having big connected wildlands and movement corridors between them. The animals will tell us where they can thrive if they have that freedom to roam, and we can help build those wild ways for them. So thanks for that question.
Great. We'll do one more about grizzlies. A number of you have brought up the current turns in the plot, if you will, of the grizzlies listing status under the Endangered Species Act, with the state of Montana currently petitioning to have them delisted. One of you asked whether Vital Ground will still work to protect grizzlies if they are delisted from the Endangered Species Act. And from the Vital Ground perspective, I can say the answer is a very much yes. Our work to protect habitat on private lands that connect public lands will go on regardless of the grizzlies' status under the Endangered Species Act. But Doug, some folks were curious how you would weigh in on this current development.
Well, I just want to reiterate that umbrella idea that we keep focusing on grizzlies, and I do too, but if it's good enough for grizzlies, a landscape, and if they can move, if they can find what they need, it's going to be good enough for elk and trout, those riparian areas, as trumpeters, swans, wolverines, lynx. You know, pick an animal you like if somebody isn't fond of grizzlies or use them as a headache. But I noticed in the recent push by the state to delist grizzlies, as they tried this earlier in Yellowstone and got shot down, Wyoming did. And they focus on talking about the Glacier Bob Marshall, the northern Montana population along the divide as a distinct population. And they wanted to delist population by population. And I think I just got done saying that if these subpopulations, the one in Yellowstone, the one in Glacier, the one in the Cabinets, the one in the northern Selkirk, if they're not connected over time, we haven't saved them. If we want to recover the grizzly, I wish the state were focusing on joining the various groups trying to protect enough habitat in the right places for these populations to become essentially one population, a meta population. It doesn't mean they need tens of thousands more acres everywhere. It means they need those pathways, those corridors, those habitat bridges. And why don't we focus on that? And once a bear can freely move between central Idaho and Yellowstone, or Yellowstone and Glacier Park, and vice versa, then I think delisting is going to be justifiable, because the population will have that much more vibrancy and resiliency. And if they get low in one area, the population drops, it can be replenished easily by one of the other subpopulations. But if they are all islands, no. So I think it's premature to shoot for delisting now. It's a matter of convenience. There are a lot of people that just sort of want to get back to business without having to be concerned about our state animal here in Montana. As long as we got some we can point to somewhere. That's a lot different than a vital population that will endure through time.
Thanks for that thorough answer. A question that came up in the chat a little bit ago that I think is a nice way to zoom out a bit has to do with conversations you may have had with Indigenous members or First Nations folks, talking about the kind of perspective on nature that you encourage in the book, where we no longer think of ourselves as separate from nature, because down to our biology, we aren't. And the biological side certainly has the trappings of Western science, where we're talking about DNA percentages and things. But I would be curious, and Ellen in the chat was curious, how you may have had any conversations with Indigenous folks for whom that interconnectedness may have been a part of their understanding of the world for many centuries.
Well, I just simply learn from them of a different way to you see yourself in the bear, you see the bear in you. It's a little harder with um, a slime mold, right? Okay. But the same deal. Like that's why I said I'm 24% a wine grape. I don't think the grape really cares what I look like, but it just, we in the West have, I'm out of my depth now, but we in the West have reserved the spirit or special qualities for ourselves. And we have worked assiduously. Okay. One of my favorite big words, but we work very hard to deny it to all the other creatures. We see humans and then we see all the rest of nature. And the native folks here in North America who see a great circle of life is another way of talking about, the relationships that run ecosystems to me, or the genes we all share. We've only, and again, I don't want to get into the habit of criticizing people and, good folks and bad folks, evil developers, blah, blah, blah. This information is not as widely known as it should be. That's one reason I wrote the book. It's very recent, it's very technical. I had to slog through all kinds of technical journals to at least double check that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about with genetic similarities and stuff. But there's been the traditional view of nature. I've seen it in the Chingu River with Amazon tribe, the Kayapo I was with for a while. And I see it in India, where there's a fabulous amount of wildlife for a country teeming with 1.3 billion people. There's elephants, there's tigers, there's snow leopards, there's grizzly bears in northern India. I've seen them up at 17,000 feet in the Himalayas. There's elephants all over the place in parts of India, and they're big and they demand a lot of resources. There's room for them. Why? Because of how people view animals. They see them as having a spirit or soul, and they don't see themselves as entitled to be the ones that choose who lives and who dies and what creatures are good and what creatures are bad. And so there's all these different ways of coming at it, but in the West it's a much more anthropocentric view of what's in it for me and what good do they do me. Well, it turns out they do us a lot of good, but not in the ways we expected. Nature does us a world of good. And that's why I talked about forest bathing and finding a way to be in touch with nature on your own terms and get rid of those ideas that you were raised with about humans relative to or versus the rest of the natural world, or that it's demeaning to be animal-like. Like that person's an animal, that's a dirty critter, it's a beast, it's a brute. That's just tradition. And it's hard to justify with that knowledge, but that knowledge needs to be disseminated that we have now about what we're made of and what other critters are made of, and about how much we have in common with them.
Great. I will close on that note with one last question.
Make it an easy one.
That has been on my mind. Because we all love to have something concrete to take away from a really enlightening conversation. I'm curious, Doug, as you worked on this book and surrounded yourself with statistics and research about how connected and inseparable we are from the other species on the planet, you were still living your life, and life for so many of us we spend a lot of time looking at emails and reading articles about terrible things happening mostly by our species. And I'm curious, as you were working on the book, if there were any new habits you formed to help you keep kind of the 4/5 perspective, the perspective of our interconnectedness going.
Are you asking more, how do you keep your spirits up in a time of great loss?
Or
Is
how do
that
you
part?
keep your brain straight?
Oh, well, it's arguable how straight it is, but look, I just gave a talk to my computer screen. I don't get to see anyone, you know, and I'm sitting here in a a room lit by artificial lights and staring at a computer screen and sitting on my butt and telling everyone, hey, you should go outside and be in nature. And but I do. I mean, every chance I get, I'm out in the field, and I try to question all. I think what you're getting at is I try to, every assumption I make about an animal, I try to understand where that assumption came from. And is that what I'm seeing? I mean, we have this amazing power of rationalization. We can make animals, we can make fellow humans into beasts, right? Our enemies are dirty and savage and, clumsy and stupid. And you have to be as self-aware. That's why I quoted that, or I just read that part about know thyself. And thinking of myself in terms of being related to all these other creatures, it isn't like I get up in the morning and go, I am one with everything, it's wonderful. But I do see more and more of a commonality with all the other creatures, and that may be me deluding myself too, but I know at least the scientific basis of it is sound and it feels right. And I also look very hard for, and I didn't have time tonight, but I work on, I'm on one other board that does international conservation work, and I look very hard and learn how to look and evaluate other projects, because I want to know what's succeeding. And it's easy to point to all the things going wrong. There's a lot of projects that are going right, and they involve human communities. It's not the old idea of setting aside a preserve and then locking the people out, or man versus humans. I shouldn't say man, versus nature. You know, uh, the romantic view of nature's perfect, humans bad, keep them out if we want to preserve nature. And that's sort of a false way of looking at things. It's almost as bad as deciding we're superior to nature. So I want to know how to live with animals and where that's being done, and where it's strengthening both human communities and wildlife communities. Just like getting past the economy versus ecology, the jobs versus wildlife, jobs versus nature protection. That's just a false duality. It's good economy, good ecology, vice versa. And healthy community with long-term vibrancy of humans depends on, and I've seen it with community conservancies in Africa, parts of Asia, and I see it here at home in a number of areas. And that's why I talked about the vibrant economy in the West. So I'm probably not answering your question very well, Matt, but I'm a willful optimist. I don't function well when I'm discouraged, and I don't see the point to it. I don't think I know enough. I need to just go find out more and find a way to make it work. So
You definitely answered what I was going for, Doug. There's some really nice notes in what you just said to take for all of us to take with us. Really like your idea of questioning the way we think about other animals every time we look at them. And and looking for the good news that's out there, because there is plenty of that. And
Yeah.
on that note, we'll thank everyone for joining us and encourage you to stay tuned to the good news that's going on in our little corner of the conservation world at Vital Ground. Keep up to date on our website and on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. If you aren't already, you can sign up for our email list just by going to vitalground.org and waiting for a little pop-up to ask for your email address. And we'd love to keep you in the loop and keep you informed and let you know about future events like this, and also some of the great projects we're doing to conserve these most important acres for the bear and for everything that shares its habitat. So thanks again.
My thanks
Doug-
too for everyone who waded through this eco babble here for the last a little bit, but thank you for being here.
Okay, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next one of these. Everybody have a great holiday season.